Welcome to the LowCarbUSA podcast, where we seek to inspire you to help us build this community. I'm Doug Reynolds.
And this is Pam Devine.
So Brian Gaudette is an Apache pilot and has an incredible story. He was part of a movie just released now called Fat Fiction that I was lucky enough to be a part of as well. Has an amazing story of how he lost his flight status and found a way to get it back again. So Brian, welcome. And
thanks, Doug.
Tell us a bit more about what happened and how you fixed it.
Yeah. So about 6 years ago, I was in the cockpit of an Apache helicopter. I was in the Republic of Korea serving over there in the Army. And one day, I was sitting on the ground in the aircraft, and I had the flight controls, and I put my head down and I got a relative motion effect. So it felt like the world was moving. So if you can imagine, if you're sitting in a car and you kind of see the car moving beside you and it makes you feel like you're moving, that's the sensation that I got. And it kind of took me back, and I put my head down again, and it happened again. Which when you're in an aircraft that you can flip over upside down by making abrupt control inputs, I knew that was a dangerous situation. So I went to the doctors and told them I was getting spatially disoriented. I was also suffering from what I now understand as brain fog. Like I couldn't think really clearly. I was getting confused. I couldn't articulate my thoughts. And of course, all these symptoms were really concerning to the doctors. So they sent me to pretty much all the specialists, to the cardiologist, the neurologist, ear, nose, and throat, trying to figure out what was causing these really unusual symptoms. And now, having the benefit to look back on it and sort of understand my story more thoroughly, I had slowly been getting sick for a while. I had been putting on weight, and I had gone to my doctors and said, I'm just sluggish. I don't have a lot of energy. I'm gaining weight. And I was running, not, training for a marathon running, but I was running about 30 miles per week, pretty regularly. And the weight was just coming on. And my doctor said, well, Brian, you're 30 now and your metabolism's slowing down, and this just kind of happens, and you just need to work out more. And, but when I got sick, something broke the camel's back. And what I now understand is inflammation was just rampant through my body. And it was just this incredible autoimmune flare up that was affecting my brain, my cognition, my proprioceptive senses. So fast forward, they sent me to every specialist under the sun for about 8 months, and all the tests came back perfectly normal. And anybody who's been sick for a long time without a diagnosis will tell you it's a really weird thing to almost want something to be wrong, so then you can identify it and move forward and attack it. Because at that point, it was just this no-name condition. And at the end of that 8 months, the two doctors I was seeing separately came into the office at the same time to kind of tell me they were done with me. They said, Brian, sometimes stress does weird stuff to the body. Here's a card to behavioral health. We've done all we can for you.
And during all of this time, you'd lost your flight status, right? You couldn't fly anymore.
Oh, right. Yeah. So as soon as I was feeling the spatial disorientation in the cockpit, that's when I, raised my hand, said, I have a problem. And, you can't be dizzy and flying an aircraft.
Right. Yeah, no, totally. So then something miraculous happened, really. So tell us about finding the solution here.
Yeah. Well, so I had some, they eventually diagnosed me as being subclinical hypothyroid. So like my TSH was elevated a little bit. And so they gave me some Synthroid, and they essentially, as soon as they got the lab numbers within bracket, they said you should be fine. And of course, the hypothyroid didn't explain any of the crazy symptoms I had and was still having. And a friend gave me a book by the thyroid pharmacist, she calls herself, on Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune condition that attacks the thyroid. And I got online, I got in one of the chat rooms, and I listened to all these people's stories of their symptoms. And I was just like, that's me. I have an autoimmune condition. I have Hashimoto's. So then the next step was figuring out that there were all these thousands of people who were reversing their autoimmune conditions, something that doctors said couldn't be done, using whole food nutritional protocols, elimination diet, autoimmune paleo, carnivore diet, and anything that's really restrictive and cutting out inflammatory food. And I then read several books on that. So I'd known intellectually that it would probably help. But one, it seemed very severe. And I was like, there's no way I can live and eat that way and be in the Army, because we deploy to austere environments. We have short notice travel plans. You could be in the desert and just eating Army food for several weeks to months, and pretty much preserved Army food or meals ready to eat are the exact opposite of what these dietary protocols call for, which is just real whole food, nothing processed. And MRE is essentially, half of it's a preservative. I think they have like a 20-year shelf life or something like that. So yeah, they'll withstand a nuclear fallout. So I'd known for actually almost probably about 8 months to a year that it would probably help, but I couldn't in my mind see any way that I could sustain it. So I was kind of like, why even try if there's, if it's not worth sustaining, or it's not able to be sustained. And I went to an Army school for about 6 months, and I was about to take command of my follow-on assignment would be taking command of a Apache helicopter company. And I was still struggling with cognitive issues. I was still struggling with brain fog. And I just said, there's no way that I can command other people and other aircraft and even fly if I have these symptoms. Like, it's not fair to the person I'm flying with. It's not safe. It's not fair to the company and the men and women that I'm going to lead. So I either need to figure this out and fix it, or I have to get out. And sort of when I made that decision in my mind, I said, well, I'll just give it a try, and then I can worry about how to sustain it later. So I did an elimination diet. I cut out all gluten, dairy, soy, grains, nightshades, nothing processed, no processed sugars. And it was a miracle. You use the term miraculous, and that's the only way I know how to describe it. It happened, let's say, so fast. In about 6 weeks, I dropped about 30 pounds. I got this brain back that I hadn't even remembered was there, and this sharpness back, and the ability to articulate my thoughts, and this energy. And I was like, okay, I can do this. I can still serve. Now I just have to figure out, how do I sustain it how do I live this lifestyle and eat this way while still serving in the Army? So what what I did for just really efficiency and ease was I would just cook these giant batches of bone broth, organic vegetables, and grass-fed meat soups. And I would cook about 28 meals at a time, portion them out, freeze them. I'd have them at work and have them at home. And it actually simplified my life a lot. Like I just like, okay, here's all my food. I cook once every 2 weeks. I have lunch and dinner. I'm out the door. I don't have to worry about where I'm eating or what I'm eating. And that worked really well. And then I had to figure out we deployed to Europe. And I had to figure out how do I sustain myself. So my wife and I started a little tin canning operation in my garage. So I would, work all week and then come home and start stockpiling these cans of my soup in the garage. And I ended up shipping several containers, probably about 500 pounds of soup ahead of me on deployment in a shipping container with our weapons and night vision and stuff. Had a jet boil and soup, and I was good to go. And actually a lot of the other guys were jealous of the food I was eating, even though I was eating the same thing every day. It was whole food and tasted really good and high in fat, very satiating.
So I reckon you had to be pretty guarded about that because you've only got a certain supply, right? So, I mean, there must have been tons of your mates that wanted to that wanted to try it out and maybe join you, but you couldn't share it with them.
Yeah, I mean, I gave a few away, and but for sure, everybody was actually really concerned. I would be like, "Hey, you want to try?" Like, "Oh, I don't want to take any of your soup." Like, they understood that for me, this was like a prescription medication. Like, without it, I don't function. Which I was actually kind of guarded about that. So if you can imagine we're warriors at heart. And I was telling you earlier, I've been a warrior since I was 18 years old. I've been in the Army since I was 18 years old, and was an infantryman before I was a pilot. And there is a sense of toughness. Like, you can send me anywhere. I'll sleep in the dirt. I'll eat grass. Right. And then it became this scenario where I was like, well, I need my special bone broth, organic, grass-fed, soups in order to do my mission. And so I was very self-conscious about that. And I kind of hid it. I didn't lie about it, but it wasn't something that I was out evangelizing about or telling people about. Because I really was concerned about, what am my boss going to think? Like, this guy needs like special food. And, but what I discovered was the exact opposite. As people found out, my boss found out, is, oh, you had a problem and you went to extreme measures to fix it. Like, that's awesome. That's innovative and good. Then that's what we do in the Army. We get tossed tough problems and got to figure out how to solve them.
Right.
Yeah. And, almost everybody I talked to after that said, hey, can you call my mom and talk to her? She's got all these health issues. It sounds very similar. And so I found myself being sort of this backdoor coach. My platoon leader, his wife, had a autoimmune condition, and they didn't understand all the crazy symptoms. And so I would meet with her a couple times. That same platoon leader later developed ulcerative colitis. Another company commander developed Crohn's disease. And so it was what once was the absolute lowest point in my life, because my career was going to be over, now was becoming this thing that I had of value that I could offer to other people who were struggling. And I had thought it was me. I thought I was this very unique case, right? Like, you say autoimmune condition, and it's, it sounds very exotic, right? And very rare. But the fact of the matter is, I think the last number I saw, it's like 75 million Americans have a chronic illness with an autoimmune component. So essentially, we just have this chronic inflammation problem. And then wherever the inflammation attacks, then it gets a name, associated with an autoimmune condition.
Right, manifests itself in one of the myriad of conditions that are all associated with this.
Yeah, 100%. For me, it was like the inflammation attacked the thyroid. So like, oh, you have Hashimoto's, but then we know it. Anybody who has an autoimmune condition knows it affects every aspect of your body.
And so you became known as Captain Soup, right?
Yeah. So when I was in Europe and, packing around my jet boil and cans of soup, I lived with several other officers and first sergeants in my company, and really they were trying to make fun of me, right? So it's not like, it wasn't an endearing character. It's like, oh, what's up? It's Captain Soup. What's in the kitchen? It's the soup kitchen. Because they knew, every meal, it was they would kind of joke like, what's for dinner today?
Yeah.
But I just kind of owned it, and also what I discovered is, as long as you perform well, nobody cares.
Right.
If you're making mission and you're making stuff happen, nobody really cares what you have to do or what you have to eat.
But so, in a way, you were really lucky because you were a pilot and you were an officer, and so you could ship that stuff ahead. And but the guy on the ground, the average infantryman or whatever, they couldn't do that. If they were in your situation, they would be screwed because they couldn't do it. I feel like we need to find a way to get through to the military to try and change the way that people eat. Because I mean, when I first started doing this and realized all these things for me that cleared up and everything, it was like, and you work out how people can go for days without eating and still be sharp and functioning. And I love the Navy SEALs. I've watched gazillions of videos and documentaries and that about them. And one of the first things that came to my mind was, God, how brilliant would this be for the Navy SEALs? How they go in country now, they carrying so much less. If they ran out of food, it wouldn't even matter. And they would be sharper and better in the process. So why isn't this being taken on?
So the Navy SEALs recently just did a study on the ketogenic diet, and the way the news kind of spun it was like, oh, the whole military is recommending shifting to keto, which that'd be amazing, right? For chronic health issues, because the Army has, in general, we think of the Army as commandos, which we have, but that's also a small percentage of the military force. We're essentially a huge city. We have doctors and lawyers and dentists and pack clerks and infantrymen. Everybody's in the Army going towards one mission, but we have an obesity problem within the Army that's causing just as much fiscal and productivity damage as it is in the rest of the regular population. I would say we're not as obese as the rest of the population, but we have an obesity problem that's been identified in the last couple of years. But as far as peak performance, the Navy special forces tend to be very much more out in front of cutting edge research. And so the Navy SEALs recently conducted a study on the ketogenic diet, and they cited the just the reduced weight per calorie, and then also the abilities of the Navy SEALs to actually hold their breath longer underwater and go longer doing sort of a fasting regime.
And I know Dominic D'Agostino has done a lot of work with them, but back in those days, it was the problems they were having with the rebreathers, where some of them were having fits underwater using the rebreathers, and they were looking at using exogenous ketones and in order to try and mitigate that and try and prevent those guys from having these seizure issues underwater. Some, not all, but a few of them would have these problems, but it was more than one, right? So enough that they were trying to find out why and how to fix it. So it's not just the energy side of things, and there's other cognitive issues as well that would be solved by introducing this. I mean, if the MREs could be not necessarily keto, but at least low carb and have some more fat bombs and that. It goes with the MREs too. They could be smaller with
Right.
the same amount of food value. I just feel like we have to find a way to get through to these guys, because it would be, if they actually took it on board seriously, it would be such a step forward, I think.
Yeah, and figuring out where that entry point is, right? Because we kind of say they, but there's a bunch of different bodies. There's folks who buy food and do the food testing for the Army. There's special forces kind of have their own thing going, right. Their own budget. I've recently just been tied in with a group of DoD folks who are collaborating for functional medicine initiatives. And the Army just rolled out a holistic health and fitness campaign, understanding that, the current model is not working, but I don't know there's been a cohesive argument or plan forward for how are we going to change? How are we going to change this paradigm? Like, how are we going to shift the tide? I think there's opportunity for it, because the campaign's not very prescriptive. It's just about like, these are the things broadly we need to do. We need to think about diet. We need to think about sleep. We need to think about stress management. We need to think about the spiritual aspect of being human. The Army understands, I think, this is what wellness is, but the specifics, especially when it comes to diet, I haven't heard of an initiative yet that's mainstream looking to change, the way the Army feeds its people. But I'm actually, so I'm a pilot by trade, but now I work at West Point, the U.S. Military Academy in New York. And right. It's really sort of the bastion of Army thought, and there's a lot of brilliant people in here, and so I'm looking to see how I can leverage just my location here at this great institution to bring the experts together on campus and talk to our scientists and doctors, and see if we can get some clinical trials going.
I'd love to see that. If there's any way that you can think of that we could help somehow, and let me know, because I feel like this is something close to my heart, and it's I feel it's like really, really important to look after it basically comes down to looking after our guys, I mean, seriously. And it's not about like we just released our clinical guidelines for doctors to use it as a therapeutic intervention. But why do people have to get sick before we tell them to change their food? Why not get them to eat right from the beginning so they don't get sick?
Right.
That to me is first prize. When we can get to a point where people are eating this way in order not to get sick, instead of trying to fix themselves once they are sick, I think then I feel like we would have made some real progress.
Yeah, 100%. But it's really hard to get out of the convention and the dogma, because when I might get in trouble for this, but when I look across at the nutritionists, our troops have to work out. They get taped and measured and weighed. And so if you start to push those guys, we have steps that we do. You send them to a nutritionist, they do extra physical exercise. And just from what I've seen, it's just not effective.
No, exactly.
And the data, the data will point to that as well. Like, our obesity trends are going up, and this Army doctor, I don't have his name right here, but he did the economic cost of these soldiers, and they're saying they potentially cost 3 to 4 times more than they're producing. And it was, I want to say it was close to around like 18% of active duty males. And that number just floored me, because you're talking about a population who is, part of their job is to work out. And so the whole narrative of eat less, move more, it doesn't really hold water.
Exactly. Yeah. So, like I said, if there's anything you can think of that we can do to help with that, and you're right. I mean, they've got their, I mean, it's all the doctors, all the nutritionists, the whole, and we, it's like, it's very similar to outside of the military. It's the same thing. Most of the doctors don't believe it yet. Most of the nutritionists don't believe it yet. And
Right.
a few of them do. And hopefully someone with some kind of severe influence finally gets it. And I think that's going to be a point where stuff starts to happen, when someone really high up has an epiphany or saves their life by changing what they eat or whatever. And then they're going to try and help push that through
Yeah.
a lot more effectively.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you just think statistically they have to be out there. But I think,
of course,
it's like me, it's not, I mean, with Captain Soup, I'm out there now, right? I had to fully integrate and just be fully upfront with people who I am, what I'm about. And that's opened actually a lot of other doors within the military. But trying to get connected, because I feel like they're out there, and then giving them a vehicle or a movement to get behind and lend their name to, I think that would help a lot.
Yeah. Well, it's been an immense privilege to get to speak with you. I hope that we end up collaborating more and we get to work together, because I think what you've been doing is incredible. And thank you for joining us, and I wish you all the best.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm humbled, and yeah, we'll definitely be in touch and collaborate in the near future.
Brilliant, man.
All right, take care.
Okay. You've been listening to an episode of the LowCarbUSA podcast. You can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/LowCarbUSA.